The Atlantic stretched out endlessly in every direction, a sheet of glittering silver beneath the Miami sun. The yacht was cutting through the waves at a steady pace, its white hull slicing the surface like a knife. I stood near the rail, trying to steady myself. My body was still weak from the car accident a month ago, and the medication I had taken earlier made me lightheaded. The sea breeze was cool, brushing against my cheeks, but it carried with it a chill that I could not shake. Behind me, I heard the click of expensive heels. Vanessa, my sister-in-law, walked across the deck with the grace of someone who had always gotten what she wanted. She was dressed in a sleek black sundress and oversized sunglasses that concealed her eyes, but not her smile. That smile was sharp, mocking like a blade hidden behind velvet. She leaned in close, so close that I could smell the faint hint of expensive perfume mixed with salt air. "Say hi to the sharks, darling," she whispered softly in my ear. "They love fresh meat." Before I could react, her hands shoved me forward. The push was not playful. It was sudden, firm, and final. My stomach lurched as the deck dropped away beneath me and the sky spun. For an instant, I saw the horrified face of my brother Daniel framed against the sunlight, but his horror was an act. His eyes betrayed nothing except cold calculation. The water hit me like a wall, cold and heavy. My navy blue dress ballooned around me, dragging me downward. I kicked frantically, but my limbs felt like lead. The salt stung my eyes and filled my mouth as I gasped involuntarily. Panic seized me as I struggled to break the surface. When I managed to thrust my head above the waves, I could hear Daniel shouting, "Oh my God, Rachel!" She fell, but he did not jump in. He did not even reach for a life ring. He stood frozen on the deck, watching as I thrashed in the water. His performance would have looked convincing to anyone else, but to me, it was confirmation of the betrayal I had long suspected. Then I saw it, a dark shape gliding beneath the waves, long, slender fins cutting silently through the water. My heart slammed in my chest. Reef sharks. I had seen them before during naval training exercises years ago. Back then, they had seemed majestic at a distance. Now they were death circling closer with every passing second. I forced myself to remember what I had learned. Do not thrash. Do not bleed. Keep eye contact. Stay calm. But calm was impossible when every instinct screamed that I was prey. My arms ached from trying to stay afloat. The medication in my bloodstream dulled my reflexes. My lungs burned for air. And still I could hear the faint echo of Vanessa's whisper in my head. "Say hi to the sharks." The yacht continued forward as if nothing had happened. I saw Daniel glance down one last time. Vanessa raised her phone, casually angling it so the camera caught me flailing. Evidence for later. A grieving brother and his widow sister-in-law would explain how the unstable younger sister had slipped. Perhaps she had been confused from medication. Perhaps she had leaned too far. A tragic accident in shark waters. Who would question it? The fins sliced closer. I turned slowly, trying to keep my movement steady. My vision blurred from salt and fear. For a brief moment, one shark passed so near I could see the black eye staring at me unblinking. The ocean seemed endless. No other boats in sight. No help. Just me against predators, both human and animal. My heart pounded, but beneath the terror, a spark of defiance flared. I was not ready to die. Not like this. Not to feed the greed of my own blood. I forced my legs to move rhythmically, kicking upward to stay afloat. Every muscle screamed, but my mind clung to one thought. Survive. As another wave lifted me high, I shouted, though no one could hear. If you are watching this, now subscribe and tell me where you are from. Tell me if you believe family could throw you to the sharks for money. Salt water choked me, cutting off my words. The yacht was already a shrinking speck against the horizon. My arms trembled with exhaustion. The fins kept circling. Yet even in that moment of despair, I made myself a vow. If I live, I will never forgive them. If I survive these waters, these sharks, this betrayal, I will return. I will return stronger than they could ever imagine. And when I stand again, it will be with proof and with fury. The waves crashed over my head again, dragging me down into the dark. My chest felt like it would burst. The shapes below me multiplied, but my mind repeated the vow again and again. If I survive, I will not stop until they pay. I opened my eyes in the sting of salt water staring into the abyss, and I told myself this was not the end. This was only the beginning. My name is Rachel Ward, and before that day on the yacht, I believed that no matter how far apart siblings drift, there was always something unbreakable between them. Daniel was my older brother 2 years ahead of me, the boy who once helped me fix my bike and stood up for me in the schoolyard. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 20 and Daniel 22. The tragedy left us both reeling, but we swore we would always look after one another. At least that is what I thought. After college, I chose a different path than most of my friends. Fascinated by ships and the sea, I joined the Navy trained in engineering and later became a naval architect. I had disciplined technical skill and a steady reputation. Years later, I left active duty and began working for a private shipbuilding company in Florida, where I designed modifications for vessels used in both commerce and defense. It was demanding work, but I loved it. Daniel, on the other hand, gravitated toward finance. He was clever, charming, and persuasive, with a talent for making people invest in ideas that barely existed. When he married Vanessa 6 years ago, I wanted to believe she was a good match. She was beautiful, sharp, and carried herself like a woman who expected doors to open for her. She had practiced law, briefly specializing in corporate contracts, but left the profession quickly claiming she wanted to focus on building a portfolio with Daniel. Our father had been the founder of Ward Shipping and Logistics, a company that had grown steadily over 3 decades. When he passed away unexpectedly, the estate was split between us. There was also a trust worth $100 million. The division was not equal in appearance, but was carefully structured. Daniel would handle the financial administration of the company, and I would inherit control over the engineering and operations divisions. Together, we had the ability to decide the company's direction. At first, I thought this structure would keep us united. Instead, it became a wedge. Daniel was frustrated that I had veto power over major technical decisions. I refused to approve reckless ventures that would compromise safety or put us into debt. Vanessa whispered constantly in his ear, reminding him that with full control, he could expand faster sell assets or even move into risky speculative markets. She looked at me as an obstacle, and I could feel her disdain in every conversation. When our father died, we gathered in the old family home to hear the terms of the will. Daniel accepted his role with a smile, but I could see the shadow in his eyes. That was the moment the bond between us began to crumble. In the years after, I noticed subtle changes, calls unanswered, invitations not extended. When Daniel did speak to me, it was often to ask about transferring my shares or simplifying the trust. He insisted it would make taxes easier, that I could step back and enjoy life while he handled business. I always said no. I could not put the legacy of our father into his hands alone, not with Vanessa steering him. That refusal created a silent war inside the family. Vanessa's words carried poison. She made sly remarks at dinners, comments about how I was too focused on work, how maybe I was lonely because I had never married. She would laugh softly as if it was a joke, but the message was clear. To them, I was expendable. When my accident happened a month before the yacht incident, I suspected nothing. I was hit by a reckless driver on the freeway. The recovery was painful, and I was on strong medication. Daniel and Vanessa visited me in the hospital, bringing papers they claimed were temporary powers of attorney to help manage bills while I recovered. I was barely conscious, but I remember my hand being guided across dotted lines. Later, I brushed it off, assuming they had only been trying to help. I see now that moment was the beginning of their plan. A plan rooted in greed, sharpened by resentment, and sealed with betrayal. The invitation came 2 weeks after I left the hospital. Daniel called me personally, which was unusual because for months, most communication had been through his assistant. His voice was warm, almost nostalgic, as he told me he wanted to celebrate my recovery. He said he had bought a new yacht and thought a short cruise off the Miami coast would be the perfect way to reconnect just the 3 of us like old times. His words made me pause, but I wanted to believe that maybe he missed me, that maybe he remembered the bond we once had. I accepted. On the morning of the trip, I dressed carefully. My hips still ached and my steps were cautious, but I wanted to look strong. The sun was bright as I arrived at the marina. The yacht gleamed white and polished far larger than anything Daniel could afford on his legitimate salary. I pushed the thought aside as he greeted me with an embrace. It was stiff rehearsed and lasted only a second. Vanessa stood on the deck watching with a glass of champagne already in her hand. She smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. For the first hour, everything seemed pleasant. We cruised past the skyline, the ocean calm, Vanessa serving drinks with the charm of a hostess at a gala. She asked about my recovery, and Daniel made small talk about business expansions. Then his questions turned sharper. He asked whether I had updated my will, whether I had considered restructuring the trust, whether the power of attorney documents from the hospital were still in effect. He spoke casually, refilling my glass again and again, pressing the conversation as though it were natural. My stomach tightened. I noticed Vanessa was not taking selfies as she pretended, but was tilting her phone so the camera pointed at me. The realization made my blood run cold. She was recording me drinking, slurring slightly from the medication, capturing clips that could later be framed as proof that I was confused or incompetent. Suddenly, the accident, the hospital papers, the sudden warmth from Daniel all clicked together into something sinister. I remembered the way he had insisted I sign those forms while I was barely conscious. I remembered how my financial advisor had stopped returning calls after that. This was not hospitality. It was a staged performance, a collection of evidence for a case they were building against me. Daniel leaned closer, his tone dropping to something almost rehearsed. He said probate can be complicated and that the last thing he wanted was for me to worry. He said I should let him handle everything so that in the event of anything unfortunate there would be no confusion. Vanessa laughed softly and lifted her phone again. At that moment, I set my glass down carefully and looked him directly in the eye. My voice was steady, though my hands shook. I said I wanted to go back to shore immediately. His expression changed in an instant. The brotherly mask slipped. His voice hardened. I am afraid that is not going to happen, Rachel. Vanessa stepped closer, her smile widening. She said that I had been showing signs of memory issues that doctors agreed I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. The words hit me like ice water. Memory issues. They were going to declare me incompetent. They had orchestrated everything. The silence between us grew heavy, broken only by the sound of waves against the hull. Daniel spread a folder of papers across the small table, contracts transferring all assets into his control for my own protection. His eyes were cold as winter. Vanessa raised her glass and said they could do this the easy way or the hard way. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized just how far they were willing to go. Every laugh, every toast, every smile on that yacht was nothing but a step in their scheme. The sun was beginning to dip lower, painting the ocean in shades of orange and gold when Vanessa moved closer. I had stepped toward the railing to breathe, to collect myself, to hide the trembling in my hands as I processed the enormity of their betrayal. The sea stretched vast and endless. No other vessels in sight, only gulls circling above, and the quiet churn of waves against the yacht. Vanessa's heels clicked softly on the deck as she approached. Her voice was almost playful, a whisper meant only for me. "Sharks are hungry tonight," she said, her hand pressed against my back with a force that carried no hesitation. I stumbled forward, the railing catching my thighs for an instant before gravity won. The world flipped upside down. I saw Daniel's face one last time, his mouth opening in a theatrical cry. Rachel fell before the ocean swallowed me whole. The water hit with crushing weight. My clothes absorbed gallons, instantly dragging me down. My body was heavy and uncooperative, dulled by the lingering medication. Salt seared my throat as I gasped underwater. Kicking wildly, I fought to rise my lungs, screaming for air. At last, I broke the surface, coughing and spitting hair plastered across my face. Above, Daniel's figure leaned over the railing, but he made no move to save me. He raised his hands to his head like an actor in a tragedy. He shouted words I could barely hear over the crash of the waves, but there was no life ring thrown, no ladder lowered, only the yacht slowing slightly before accelerating again. Vanessa stood at his side, her phone raised, recording me flailing like prey. That image burned into my memory. Then I felt it. a shadow sliding below, long and deliberate. A fin cut the surface 20 feet away, then another. Reef sharks. My heart froze. I had encountered them during naval training exercises years ago, but never in such vulnerable circumstances. Terror nearly paralyzed me, yet a fragment of training clawed its way through the panic. Do not thrash. Do not show fear. Keep your eyes on them. Make yourself look strong. My arms burned from fatigue as I tread water carefully, trying to keep movement steady. I remembered drills in swimming pools at dawn, instructors barking orders as we learned survival techniques. Those lessons were all that stood between me and death now. The sharks circled closer, curious, their dark bodies gliding beneath the surface. One passed so near that I could see its eye, flat and black like polished stone. I forced myself to kick rhythmically upward, my head above water just long enough to breathe. Salt stung every raw nerve. My chest tightened. Every second felt like an eternity. Behind me, the yacht was shrinking, its engines humming as it carried my brother and his wife farther away, leaving me as a convenient tragedy to be explained later. I could almost hear Vanessa's whisper echoing in the wind, say hi to the sharks. I clenched my teeth and vowed I would not die here. My father had raised me stronger than this. The legacy of Ward shipping would not end with my body torn apart in the Atlantic. I steadied myself, eyes locked on the fins circling around me, and I thought only of survival. Somewhere out there I prayed a boat might pass. Somewhere out there I prayed for one more chance to live long enough to make them pay. The waves battered me until I thought my body would split apart. My arms trembled with exhaustion, and every breath was a battle against the salt water that stung my throat. I was seconds from surrendering when I heard an engine roar in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder. I turned my head and through blurred vision saw a small fishing boat approaching, its paint-chipped nets piled high on the stern. I wanted to scream for help, but my voice was shredded by seawater. Instead, I raised one arm weakly above the surface, praying someone would see. The boat veered closer, and a man's voice shouted in Spanish, "Hold on!" Moments later, rough hands gripped under my arms and hauled me over the side. I collapsed onto the wooden deck, coughing violently, water pouring from my lungs. Above me stood an older man, weathered face, sun-beaten skin, gray beard trimmed close. He introduced himself quickly, Miguel Alvarez, captain fisherman and former Navy sailor. Beside him, a young girl barely 16 knelt down with a towel, her eyes wide with shock. "This is my granddaughter Isabella," she whispered softly as she tried to wipe the seawater from my face. I shivered uncontrollably, teeth chattering. Miguel wrapped me in a heavy coat that smelled of salt and diesel and studied my eyes. "Lady, what the hell happened out there?" he asked, his tone sharp but not unkind. I managed to rasp out between coughs, "My family tried to kill me. If you call the Coast Guard, they will finish the job." His gaze hardened at my words. He had spent his life on the water, and he knew truth when he heard it. He gave one short nod. "Then we call no one." Isabella helped me sit up and handed me a flask of hot tea they kept for long days at sea. The warmth steadied my shaking hands. Miguel turned the boat toward Key Largo, away from the main marina where eyes might be watching. Hours later, under cover of darkness, we docked at a small pier only locals used. From there, he led me to a modest guest house run by an old friend, Mrs. Chen, a 70-year-old widow who had lived through enough hardship to recognize desperation when it arrived at her door. She did not ask questions. She simply gave me dry clothes soup that tasted of ginger and broth and a room with heavy curtains. That night, as I lay under borrowed blankets listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, I began to write. With shaking hands, I opened a notebook Mrs. Chen provided, and I started an evidence log. Every detail mattered: the shove at the railing, Daniel's staged horror, Vanessa's phone recording me in secret, the conversation about power of attorney. I wrote it all. I wrote until my hand cramped because I knew memory could be twisted, but ink on paper was harder to erase. In the stillness of that night, I oscillated between terror and resolve. I had nearly been eaten alive, abandoned in shark-infested waters by my own blood. The image of the fins circling would never leave me. Yet alongside the horror burned something else, a flame of fury that pushed back against despair. They thought they had erased me. They thought they had staged the perfect accident. They did not know I had survived. Miguel checked on me at dawn. His weathered face softened when he saw the notebook filled with frantic writing. "You plan to fight back?" he asked quietly. I nodded. They wanted me gone because of money, because of power. But if I stayed hidden, if I let them claim my life was lost, they would succeed. I told him I had to gather evidence, I had to prove what they had done. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder and said, "Then you will not do it alone." In that moment, I knew I had found an ally. The fear had not left me, but it was joined by something stronger. Determination. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains, and for a brief moment, I wondered if it had all been a nightmare. Then the ache in my body reminded me it was real. Over breakfast, Mrs. Chen slid a folded newspaper across the table. The headline froze my breath. "Prominent shipping heiress lost at sea." Beneath it was my photograph taken at a charity gala months earlier. The article described how Rachel Ward tragically fell from her brother's yacht during a family cruise. Witness statements suggested medication had impaired her judgment. Daniel was quoted at length about his sister's recent memory lapses. Vanessa was described as inconsolable. My obituary had already been drafted. Donations were being directed to an Alzheimer's research fund. I clenched the paper in my hands until the ink smudged. They were not only killing me, they were rewriting me. Miguel read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. "They are laying the groundwork," he muttered. "They want everyone to believe you were sick, confused, unstable." I whispered, "Then, I need proof they staged it." That night, Miguel agreed to take me back near the old family house in Miami. Under cover of darkness, we slipped into the neighborhood. My heart hammered as I used the spare key Daniel never thought to ask back. The house smelled different, like strangers had walked through memories that once belonged to me. Furniture covered in sheets, new expensive pieces added the air-conditioned chill, unfamiliar. We crept into my father's old study where I found stacks of documents spread across the desk. I opened a binder labeled Project R. My blood went cold as I read. It was a timeline of my supposed decline. Notes about confusion at parties, misplaced keys, forgetting names. Photographs included the hospital forms they had made me sign when barely conscious. Each entry carefully documented, designed to support a diagnosis of dementia. This was not clumsy fraud. It was meticulous, organized, calculated. Among the files was correspondence marked with the initials MT. The letters referred to legal strategies and probate timelines. Whoever MT was, they were orchestrating every move. I snapped photos of every page with a disposable camera Miguel had given me. Just as I tucked the papers back in place, a faint sound pierced the silence. A cry. High-pitched. Fragile. A baby's cry. I froze. Vanessa had never carried a pregnancy. She had boasted often about not wanting to ruin her figure. Yet somewhere in this house, a newborn was wailing. Miguel's eyes widened. We followed the sound to a back bedroom where the door was slightly ajar. Inside, I glimpsed a crib blanket's expensive toys. The nurse sat rocking a tiny infant, humming softly. My breath caught in my throat. Whose child was this? Why was there a baby in my family home? I stumbled back before the nurse could notice. My chest tightened as realization struck. This was not only about stealing my inheritance. They were planting an heir, someone to replace me entirely. As we slipped out into the night, the cry still echoed in my ears. I felt sick, betrayed all over again, erased not only as a sister, but as a human being. I had been written out of my own bloodline. On the drive back, Miguel broke the silence. They did not just want your money, they want your legacy. They want to raise that child as proof they deserve everything. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the truck window. The rage in me grew heavier than the ocean that had tried to drown me. My family had thrown me to sharks, and now they were cradling a stolen baby under my roof. I vowed again through clenched teeth that this was not the end. This was the beginning of their reckoning. The discovery of the baby haunted me through sleepless nights. I could still hear the fragile wails and see the crib tucked neatly in the room that used to belong to me. It was proof that Daniel and Vanessa's plan stretched deeper than I imagined. Miguel watched me pace the floor of Mrs. Chen's guest house until finally he said, "There is a man you should meet." The next afternoon, he introduced me to David Collins, a private investigator in his early 50s with a square jaw, gray hair, and eyes that missed nothing. Over coffee in a dimly lit diner, David listened silently as I laid out every detail from the shove into shark waters to the staged paperwork. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "I worked Boston PD for 20 years, he said. "I now consult with the FBI on a task force dealing with elder fraud and inheritance scams. Your story fits patterns we have seen, but rarely this organized." He asked if I had any proof. I slid the disposable camera across the table. After scanning the photos, David nodded grimly. "That signature MT appears often. I know who that is. Miranda Torres. She is a lawyer who has built a reputation in estate planning, but underneath she runs schemes where families accelerate inheritance by declaring relatives incompetent. She has been on our radar, but she is careful." He flipped through more photos until his eyes paused at the image of the nursery. "And this explains the final piece," he murmured. "Vanessa was never pregnant," I whispered, my voice shaking. David confirmed what I feared. They contracted with Whitmore Fertility, a discreet surrogacy clinic known for handling wealthy clients off the record. He pulled a file from his bag showing receipts paid in cash 8 months earlier. The birth mother was a runaway girl named Sarah, only 17. She delivered the baby 3 weeks ago. Records claim she died from complications. But according to a nurse who spoke off record, Sarah was healthy up until labor. My stomach turned. "They bought a baby," I whispered. David nodded gravely. "And they needed you out of the way to legitimize him as heir. Vanessa has now hired a private nurse named Carol Peterson, paid 3 times the normal salary, instructed not to let the child outside or speak to neighbors. That is why no one questions the sudden arrival of a newborn." My hands shook as I covered my mouth. That child was innocent, yet being used as a pawn in their empire of lies. I asked to meet Carol. It took days of cautious planning. Finally, David arranged it during the hours when Daniel and Vanessa were in meetings downtown. Carol answered the door with tired eyes, a bottle in her hand. When she saw me, she froze. "You are supposed to be dead," she whispered. I stepped inside quickly and said, "My name is Rachel Ward, and you are holding my brother's stolen child." Carol's face drained of color. She admitted she had wondered about inconsistencies about how Vanessa showed no signs of childbirth, about why she was told never to let outsiders see the baby. Tears welled in her eyes as she said, "I only took the job to support my own son. I did not know." I asked to hold the infant. My arms trembled as I lifted the tiny boy, his eyes dark and serious. A sob tore from my chest. I whispered, "I will protect you." For the first time since the ocean, I felt a surge of purpose, not born of fear, but of love. David took photos, documented the nursery, and instructed Carol to keep a log of every visit Daniel and Vanessa made. Carol agreed, shaken but determined to help. As I left with Miguel beside me, I looked at the small house and swore this baby would not be raised in lies. They thought they could erase me with sharks and signatures, but now I had a new vow: to protect this child, to expose the fraud, and to bring every single accomplice into the light. Once the pieces fell into place, I knew waiting quietly would not be enough. Daniel and Vanessa believed I was gone, a tragic accident swallowed by the sea. That belief gave me a weapon. The first strike had to be psychological. I sat at Mrs. Chin's kitchen table late into the night, drafting a letter on heavy stationery, the kind my father once used for formal business. My handwriting was steady, though my heart pounded. "Dear Daniel and Vanessa, reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Rachel." I sealed it in an envelope and added a postscript that would slice them open. "Give my regards to little Robert. He is beautiful." At 11:45 the next morning, while they met Miranda Torres downtown to finalize probate filings, a courier hand delivered that letter to the law office conference room. David sat across the street with a telephoto lens watching from his car. He described how the moment Vanessa unfolded the page, her face turned to ash. Daniel stood abruptly, knocking over a glass of water while Miranda tried to gather them with a hissed whisper. Within minutes, they bolted from the building, their polished controls shattered. Panic was my ally now. That afternoon I went further. There was a funeral for me already arranged with all the pomp money could buy. A mahogany casket, mountains of flowers, black limousines lined outside the cemetery. I stood at a distance on a small hill with binoculars Miguel had borrowed from his boat. I watched friends from childhood wipe tears, neighbors clutch tissues, former colleagues murmur about my brilliance gone too soon. My heart twisted at the sight of their grief while knowing the people standing closest to the casket were the architects of my attempted murder. Daniel in a sharp black suit, Vanessa in designer morning wear, both accepting sympathy with trembling hands and solemn nods. I had to bite my lip to stop myself from screaming across the graves that I was alive. Instead, I studied. I noted who attended and who did not. My financial advisor, Richard Barnes, was absent. My accountant, Michael Torres, nowhere in sight. My lawyer, Patricia Walsh, also missing. Their absence told me everything. They were complicit, ashamed to face the crowd. When the ceremony ended, Daniel and Vanessa lingered speaking softly to selected guests, ushering away anyone who asked probing questions. Their control was slipping, and I was determined to tighten the screws. That night, back at Mrs. Chin's, I reviewed the photographs and news coverage online. Comment sections filled with condolences and shock. I whispered to Miguel, this is exactly what they wanted, a grieving community, a clean narrative. He replied softly, then break it. Show them cracks. The next morning, I placed a second note in Vanessa's mailbox, unsigned but clear, I saw you at the funeral, nice performance. Her scream when she found it rattled the neighborhood, David reported later with a smirk. Step by step, their confidence crumbled. Each move I made reminded them I was not a ghost, but a shadow waiting to strike. The emotional toll on me was heavy. Watching my friends cry over my empty grave broke something inside. Yet it also hardened my resolve. The woman who had been thrown to sharks was reborn in fire. I would not stop at haunting. I would expose them in daylight. My decision was made. The time for hiding was over. The next stage would be public revelation backed by federal law. The hunters would learn what it felt like to be prey. The house that had once been my sanctuary now stood as a stage for their undoing. I sat in the old leather armchair my father had given me when I graduated from the academy, its familiar creak grounding me as I steadied my breathing. The walls carried echoes of childhood laughter, but tonight the air was thick with tension. On the mantel lay a manila folder stuffed with photographs, contracts, and forged certificates. My recorder was hidden in plain sight on the table beside me, its red light concealed. When the front door opened and footsteps echoed through the hall, I did not flinch. Daniel and Vanessa entered expecting silence, but froze when their eyes fell on me. I greeted them with a calm smile. "Hello, darlings. How was your meeting?" Vanessa's face drained of color, her scream sharp and raw, while Daniel's keys clattered to the floor. I told them the reports of my death had been premature, though I did enjoy reading my own obituary. Alzheimer's donations. That was a clever touch. Their eyes darted toward each other, then back to me. Vanessa's composure returned first, her lips curling into a sneer. "You cannot prove anything," she hissed. That was my cue. I opened the folder and spread evidence across the table. Photographs of them meeting Miranda Torres receipts from Whitmore Fertility, the forged will leaving everything to Daniel and any future child. Then I held up the falsified birth certificate. "Tell me, Vanessa, when exactly did you give birth?" She faltered, eyes narrowing. Daniel tried to speak, but I cut him off by clicking the recorder on the table. "Every word you say tonight is being preserved. Massachusetts law may require consent, but this operation is federal now, and my friends are listening." The color drained from Daniel's face. At that moment, the sound of boots thundered against the porch. The front and back doors burst open simultaneously. Agents in dark jackets flooded the room, shouting, "Federal agents, nobody move." Miranda Torres had arrived moments before, confident and calm, only to be slammed to the floor by 2 FBI officers as she tried to escape. She spat curses as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Agent Sarah Chin stepped forward and announced, "Miranda, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering." Torres struggled, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the chaos, I stood unmoving, my gaze fixed on Daniel and Vanessa. The hunters were caged. My brother's face twisted with something between shame and rage as he realized the empire he built on betrayal was crumbling in seconds. For years, they had plotted my erasure, but now, under the harsh light of justice, it was they who disappeared into custody. The weeks that followed felt like both a blur and a lifetime. Court hearings stretched on headlines screamed betrayal in the Ward family, and my name was spoken in every news outlet not as a victim lost at sea, but as a survivor who had turned the tide. Daniel accepted a plea deal for 25 years in federal prison, his charm and false grief stripped bare in front of the judge. Vanessa, who had been so poised in her designer mourning clothes, was sentenced to 20 years after evidence proved she orchestrated every detail of the deception and paid off clinic staff to conceal the truth of the baby's birth. Miranda Torres fought her charges, but the recordings, the documents, and her own words during the sting sealed her fate. Life in prison without parole. I attended every day of the trial, not because I enjoyed watching their downfall, but because I wanted them to see the face of the woman they tried to erase. I wanted them to know that every moment of their remaining years would be spent remembering the ocean, the sharks, and the sister they had failed to drown. The child became the heart of the story. In family court, I petitioned for adoption. The judge listened as David Collins presented the full investigation, the evidence of surrogacy fraud, and the testimony of nurse Carol Peterson, who bravely described how she had been misled into caring for a child created only to secure inheritance. The judge's gavel came down, and I was granted guardianship. I named him Robert Miguel Ward Robert for my father, who built the company with his bare hands, Miguel for the fisherman who pulled me from shark waters. Holding Robert in my arms for the first time as his legal guardian, I whispered a promise that he would never know the lies his so-called parents intended for him. Miguel returned to his fishing life, but he called every week to ask about Robert. Mrs. Chen became a grandmother figure, her home a place where I often brought the boy to play. David remained close, his FBI connections continuing to dismantle the network of elder fraud that Miranda had managed for years. Over 17 other families received justice because of the case that began with me falling into the sea. Out of the wreckage, I built something new. I founded the Shark Survivors Foundation, dedicated to protecting elderly victims of inheritance abuse and families manipulated by fraudulent legal schemes. We funded legal aid, provided safe housing, and offered education so no one else would be pushed into figurative or literal shark waters. At conferences, I spoke plainly. Family is not blood, I told audiences of gray-haired men and women. Family is who pulls you from the water when you are drowning. Family is who stands by you when others circle like predators. My words resonated because they were true. At night, when the world was quiet, I sometimes still dreamed of the ocean, the circling fins, the weight of water crushing me down. I would wake in a cold sweat, but then I would hear Robert's steady breathing from the crib beside my bed, and the terror would ease. I had not only survived, I had saved him too. 5 years later, Robert is a bright child with a stubborn streak and a love of the sea. He knows his mother was a brave young woman named Sarah who wanted him to have a better life. He knows his adoptive parents tried to steal him but failed. Most importantly, he knows he is loved. The scars of betrayal never fully fade, but they sharpen into lessons. Betrayal taught me strength. Greed taught me vigilance. And survival taught me to cherish allies who prove their loyalty in actions, not words. One evening, as the sun dipped over the water, I held Robert on the pier and whispered, "Family is not about who shares your blood. It is about who would dive into shark waters to save you." Then I looked into the horizon and thought of Daniel and Vanessa, still caged by the justice they had earned, and I felt no pity. They had chosen greed over love, and in the end, they drowned in the very waters they pushed me into. I turned back to Robert and smiled. Our family was stronger rebuilt on truth, compassion, and resilience. The final words I leave you with are this: do not let anyone convince you that family has the right to own you, control you, or throw you away. Protect your truth. Fight for your life, and remember that survival is only the first step. Rebuilding is where victory lies. If you are listening, like, subscribe, and share your story because your voice matters more than you know.